I'm Pastor Tom from Portage United Methodist Church, and today is Wednesday, April 8th, and Holy Wednesday, the Wednesday of Holy Week. And I'm glad you're here. And I want to begin by reading to you from the Gospel according to Luke. This is from Luke chapter 22. Now the feast of unleavened bread, which is called the Passover, was approaching, and the chief priests and the scribes were seeking a manner to put him to death, because they were afraid of how the people were responding to him. When it came the first day of unleavened bread, the day on which the Passover lamb was to be sacrificed, Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and prepare the Passover for us, that we may eat it." And they said to him, "Where do you want us to prepare it?" And he said, "When you have entered the city, you will meet a man who is carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him into the house that he enters, and then say to the owner of the house, 'Where is the guest room in which I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large furnished upper room. Prepare it there." And they departed and found everything just as he had told them, and they prepared for the Passover. When we read the Gospels, the what we call the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they say that what we call the Last Supper was a Passover meal, happened Thursday night before his crucifixion. Thursday, during the day, is when they would be preparing the meal. And so this passage describes first as Passover is approaching, and then as Jesus has made plans ahead of time. He's already done some kind of scheduling of a place for them to celebrate Passover. He sends the disciples ahead to get things ready. And it's very clear when this is. And Luke makes that point that it is Thursday when the lamb is to be sacrificed, and then you would eat it Thursday night to celebrate the Passover. And technically Thursday night would be what we call Friday, because the day begins when the sun sets and continues until the sunset. So the day that begins sunset Wednesday ends sunset Thursday, and then the day begins sunset Thursday and ends sunset Friday. And so that sunset Thursday to sunset Friday is actually the day in which it's that night that Passover is celebrated. In the Gospel of John, however, when we read about the final meal and the gathering of the disciples together, there's no reference to Passover. And in fact, John makes it very clear that Jesus is sacrificed, that he himself is killed on the cross at the very time when the lambs are being sacrificed in the temple. The very thing that Luke says is the day before, on Thursday during the day. John says it's happening on Friday during the day. And John is very explicit about comparing the crucifixion to the sacrifice of a Passover lamb. And so there's this deep understanding that Jesus is the sacrificial lamb, the lamb of Passover, who is slain, and that the crucifixion is a Passover experience for the believers in Jesus. Now, right away, you're going to go, well, which is it? Is Passover on Friday? That is, Friday night is when you would celebrate the meal, and Friday day, which would actually be the preceding day, would be when the sacrifice is being made? Or is it Thursday night that the meal is eaten, and Thursday day, the preceding day, when the lambs are sacrificed? Well, actually, both is probably the case. Here's what we know from the Dead Sea Scrolls. We know that the Dead Sea community, what we call Qumran, was in conflict about a great many things with the priestly establishment in Jerusalem. And one of the things that they argued about was calendar. Like, what's the right way to do calendar? The Qumran community had a calendar that was very strict and old and was solar lunar, and half of it I don't understand. But one of the things is they didn't really care when things happened. They just followed the calendar. And that meant that it was possible to have the kind of day where you have a holy day falls in that Thursday night through Friday period of time, and then you have, with Sunset Friday, Sabbath. And And what could happen as a result is you could actually end up with the fact that you have this holy day, and so you can't work. It's a Sabbath, basically. Holy days were their own kinds of Sabbaths. And so you couldn't do what you were supposed to do during the daytime, what we call Friday, the day of preparation, which was prepare enough food to eat on Sabbath, because you're not allowed to prepare food on Sabbath. You can only eat it. And so that what that would mean is, so let's say that you had an event like high holiday Passover comes on Thursday night. You would eat Thursday night, but then you can't prepare food for the following night. And you can't prepare food through Saturday. So you'd actually have to go without eating from the time your meal Thursday night. You wouldn't be able to eat again until Saturday night. And this could potentially create a hardship for people whose health was a little dicey or whatever. And so, in contrast to the Qumran community, who were they were just fine with that, because they were very, very strict, and they were very, you know, we would call them legalistic in about this stuff. The establishment in Jerusalem was a little more, user friendly. What they did was they sort of jiggered the calendar so that didn't happen. They made sure that if there was one of those times, because just like for us, Christmas can fall on a different day of the week. As the holiday moves through the week, they would make sure that you didn't have a time where you had a Thursday holiday and then Sabbath the next day, right? That combination they avoided. And so what they would have done is they would have adjusted the calendar that year, jiggered the calendar so that Passover fell on Friday, fell on the Sabbath. And what that did was that made the Sabbath extra special, but they would bump it over and keep it there. And so what you have is a description of two different calendars. Jesus and his disciples are following a calendar. It's probably the same one that the Qumran community is using, but there could very well have been an entirely different calendar in place. But Jesus is using a calendar where Thursday night is when you celebrate the Passover meal, and the establishment in Jerusalem is using a calendar where Friday night is where you celebrate the meal. And so you have both John's description that Jesus is crucified as they're preparing for Passover, and that particular Sabbath is a very important one because it falls on Passover. Passover falls on Sabbath, but the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are right that Jesus is celebrating Passover the night before, and it's Passover. It's not like, let's do it early. So this is the world in which they lived. And there was tons of arguments back then about calendars and how things went, how you measured time. Now, I know that may seem like nothing more than interesting information to you, and maybe that's enough. But I've noticed that during our time of isolation and COVID-19, that half the time I don't know what day it is. I literally am walking around going, what day is this? Often it's because I'm preparing content for one day of the week, but it's not on that day of the week. You see it on that day of the week, but I'm not preparing it that day. I have to have it done ahead of time. And so I really don't know what day it is most of the time. And yes, I can open up my phone and take a look, but it's still pretty confusing. But here's the thing. Even when we lose track of time, even when it starts to be unclear when things are, even when those, linchpins of season and time and moment start to disappear from our grasp, and we're looking at the prospect, for example, of an Easter where we're not going to be going to church physically on Easter, where we're not going to be going and having an Easter meal with family, where Easter in a lot of ways will look like the day before and the day after. As a lot of those things that mark our time disappear, it's good and important to know always that God is still with us, that regardless of the kind of time we're in, or timelessness we're in, times of struggle or times of loss or confusion or times of fear, times of darkness, God is with us. God is always and ever our light in times of darkness, our friend in times of need. My light in times of darkness, my strength in times of weakness, my joy in times of sadness. Eli, 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 thee. I will call upon your name, cry out with all of my might. I will pour my heart before you, Lord, Yeshua, beloved friend. A father to the fatherless, the comforter of the sorrowing, the singing of the nightingale. Eli, 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 thee. I will call upon your name, cry out with all of my might. I will pour my heart before you, Lord, Yeshua, beloved friend. You are the rock and refuge strong, the desire of all nations, the hope of generations. Eli, 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 Yididi. I will call upon your name, cry out with all of my might. I will pour my heart before you, Lord, Yeshua, beloved friend. My light in times of darkness, my strength in times of weakness, my joy in times of sadness. Eli, Eli, Eli,